Working men.
So hello, it is Station Marx, and today we have Alan Woods here. He is a famous British Trotskyist political and theorist, and also an author of many books. And today we'll speak about many interesting things. So, hello, Alan.
Hello, здравствуйте.
Nice to meet you here in Moscow. Do you like it?
Yes, very good. I like it. I love Moscow. I always have. But it's very different from the Moscow I knew 50 years ago. At Brezhnev's time, you know.
What are the main differences?
Oh no, that's a long subject to discuss. Let us say that I think it was a much better square then than it is now. Mm-hmm. Now it's like a circus, but that's not an important.
You know, many people say that Sobyanin, our mayor, he made Moscow very beautiful, and the underground is great, many new buses and stations.
Yes, who did?
It is a governor of the city.
Oh yes, possibly. No, Moscow, but it's a great city anyway, that's okay. I always like to come to Moscow.
Mm-hmm. So at first, tell please a little bit about yourself. How you realized that you're a Marxist, yes, for example. Just about a little of biography.
Well, I come from a working class communist family in South Wales, which you may know is an industrial working class area, mainly composed of coal mines and steel. My grandfather was a steel worker. And in a way I was brought up with that. It was an area where there was always a strong class struggle. Very strong, very fierce class struggle. And I was brought up in that atmosphere from a small child. And the earliest songs I could remember is the International and Soviet Land So Dear to Every Toiler. So it was a communist upbringing. Later on, of course, I joined the Labour Party Young Socialist, and there I became a Trotskyist. I got to know Trotsky's ideas. And although I must say that as far as I am concerned, I've never changed. I've always been a communist. I always will be a communist. Except that I believe that the ideas of Lenin and Trotsky are the genuine ideas of communism. And those are the ideas which I defend. So
in February I went to London, where we met the first time.
I remember.
And I also spoke with many Marxists there. Yes. And it was very interesting. So what is your opinion? Are left views becoming more popular in Britain now or not?
Oh yes, I don't think there's any doubt about that. Not just in Britain, but I think it's an international phenomenon. The basic reason, I think, is objective. That the crisis of capitalism now, on a world scale, well, it's the biggest crisis in 200 years, really. And everyone can see this, even if they don't understand it. Everyone can see this. And you see, beneath the surface, everywhere, beneath the surface of apparent calm and apparent stability, there's an enormous accumulation of discontent. Discontent, of rage, of fury even, and of frustration, which is seeking an expression. And in my experience, I mean, I've been active in the movement for 60 years? All my life, all my adult life. I have never known a period where people, particularly young people, but not only young people, were more open to the ideas of revolution, if you like, of communism. Look at this marvelous movement of the school students, you know, everywhere, in Russia also. Marvelous movement. They're protesting, and they're not just protesting about this or that detail. They're protesting about fundamental problems. The fundamental problems, I would say, caused by capitalism, basically. So when they say that they want a better world, well, what they're striving for, I think, is socialism, real socialism. The socialism we had in Russia in 1917, unfortunately, it developed differently. But those ideas are very, very extended now, and they will be more extended. So I'm very optimistic in that respect.
I know in England the ecological protests are very popular now, so sometimes people think that ecological protests are not socialistic protests. Do you agree with this point of view or not?
Well, put it this way, maybe in the first instance, people are, quite rightly, they're outraged at the rape of the planet. But you see, the destruction of this poses a question on the future of the human race, which is a serious question. But ultimately, through experience, I am sure that they will come to understand that the basic reason for these disasters, like the destruction of the Amazon that's taking place now, is because of big business. It's the multinational corporations that are destroying the planet. And therefore, inevitably, this movement will go in the direction of socialism. In fact, I've just learned from somebody in Russia, actually a friend of mine, who was active in this conference, in the summit that they had last June, I think it was in Switzerland. They actually formed a communist faction of the Fridays for Future movement, which is a very important development. And that will grow. That tendency inevitably will grow.
And if we return to England, what parties and organizations are more influential now?
Well, on the left, you mean?
Yeah.
There is only one. There is only one, and that's the Labour Party. And some people on the left don't understand this, but that's their problem. Lenin understood it, Trotsky understood it, certainly. The Labour Party in Britain is the only genuine mass workers' party, you could say, although, of course, it's been taken over for many years by the extreme right wing, which is really a bourgeois infiltration of the Labour Party. But the election of Jeremy Corbyn, I know Jeremy, by the way, and I'm very friendly with his second in command, John McDonnell, is a good friend of mine for many years. He put forward a left, when he was elected party leader, it was a big surprise, big shock. Everyone was stunned by this. And it's led to a colossal growth of enthusiasm, not for Labour as such, but for Jeremy Corbyn. Amazing. Among young people. I'll give you one example. You know this, do you like rock music?
Yeah, surely.
I don't. I'm a strict classical man. But there you are. No accounting for taste. But there's a festival you must have heard of, the Glastonbury Festival.
Yeah,
you must
very
have heard.
Famous. Yeah.
Very famous. Thousands and thousands of young people go there in a muddy field to listen to this horrible music. I never understood. That's my problem. But you know, they never invited a political leader to address this rock concert ever. Last year they invited Jeremy Corbyn, and he got a tremendously enthusiastic reception. You know, more people went to hear his speech than went to hear the Rolling Stones. You know, I'm not surprised because they must be old age pensioners now. Anyway, but no, there's a genuine enthusiasm and a huge growth of the Labour Party. Now it's a party of 500,000, which is the biggest political party in Europe. So there's a change, there's a fundamental change, which alarms the ruling class. They really are alarmed. That's why they're constantly attacking Corbyn all the time. So although Corbyn is not a Marxist, I think he was at one time associated with the Trotskyism, but he's not really a Marxist. He's what I would call a left reformist. As a Marxist, I understand the limitations of left reformism perfectly well. I've got no illusions about that. But you must understand the tremendous significance, the mass significance of this movement. And I strongly believe that the duty of Marxists, if you read Lenin, if you read his marvelous book, Left-Wing Communism, which contains the distilled essence of Bolshevism from the tactical point of view, the duty of Marxists is to penetrate that movement and link up with the masses, with the working class, not to create a little sect. There's too many, and there are many sects in Britain, for goodness sake. You're spoiled for choice. You can choose anyone that you like. It makes no difference because these people are irrelevant. They're completely irrelevant. The genuine movement is going through the Labour Party, and therefore we must certainly recognize that and participate in it.
Can you tell more about International Marxist Tendency, how it was organized, and what is just now?
Well, our tendency, the International Marxist Tendency, Международная марксистская тенденция по-русски, по-моему, but this is our organization. Well, how could I describe this? You see, it is, on the one hand, a very young organization. It's only existed for about 25 years as such. But it's also a very, very old organization. Our founder, unfortunately, he died a couple of years ago, Ted Grant, a great Marxist theoretician, in my opinion, the greatest theoretician after the death of Trotsky. But he actually joined the Trotsky's left opposition in 1930 in South Africa. He was from South Africa originally. So we can trace our history right back. And Ted used to tell me, when I was a young man, he used to say, you know, in the 1930s, we had in our organization in Britain one comrade who had been a member of the first the second, the third, and the fourth International. It's astonishing. I never met this man, it was before my time. But we are proud of the fact that we trace our history right back. Through Trotsky's left opposition, through the Bolshevik Party, through the October Revolution, of course, that's our tradition, right back to the Communist Manifesto. And we insist that the genuine ideas of Marxism are still or the Communist Manifesto, are just as relevant today, if not more relevant, than when Marx wrote in 1848. It's an astonishing thing. If you think about it, a document of that age that is more relevant now, says more to us now than when it was written. That's astonishing. So, shall I say that we don't pretend to have new ideas. We don't see any need for new ideas. The old ideas are perfectly relevant. And we stand for those ideas. So we are, if you like, an orthodox Marxist, Leninist, Trotskyist international. We have an organization now in about 40 countries, including Russia, where we have had an important development recently with the...
Yeah, we will speak a bit later.
Of course. But internationally now, I think we're probably the strongest Trotskyist tendency internationally now. But above all, we have a website, I think you know this, Marxist.com, which has got an extraordinary following. I think we had 1.5 million page visits last year alone, you know. And the coverage in the Chinese language, which we published on Hong Kong, received 30,000 visits, which is astonishing. So I think we're the best known website in the world. We've had a lot of influence. I had a lot of influence even in Venezuela. You probably know that I was quite close to Hugo Chavez when he was alive. And I would say, but our main strength is theory. That's the foundations. I think we're the only group internationally that produces regular Marxist theoretical books and material. As a matter of fact, tomorrow I'll be signing a contract of a history of the Bolshevik Party that I wrote some 25 years ago, I think 20 years ago, which has been translated into Russian. That'll be published in Russian. But we're the only ones that publish this material. And it has a big effect. There's enormous demand for this, a colossal interest in Marxist ideas internationally. I've got no doubt about it.
You know, some people say that you are one of the most famous Trotskyists here now in the world. Yeah.
Famous or infamous? Depends.
So, why Trotskyism? Yeah? For example, in Russia, there are some differences. For example, when I was in Britain, people there understand under the name Leninist a bit other things than in Russia, for example. So, why do you say that you are a Trotskyist?
Well, that's an interesting question. You see, to me, there is absolutely no difference between Lenin and Trotsky, the ideas of Lenin and the ideas of Trotsky. It's the same. Trotsky, by the way, never called himself a Trotskyist. He called himself Bolshevik Leninist, and his organization was the Bolshevik Leninists. Trotsky was the only one after Lenin's death that fought to defend the original, genuine ideas of the Bolshevik Party, of Lenin, and of the Russian Revolution against the degeneration of the revolution under Stalin. Of course, he paid a price for that. He was murdered in 1940. But his ideas still exist. They're still just completely valid. He was the only one, really. He was the only one that predicted in 1936, in his book, The Revolution, he predicted precisely the collapse of the Soviet Union and the reasons why it would collapse, why the bureaucracy would move towards capitalism. So those are it's the question of the ideas, you see, which we continue to defend. When Stalin murdered Trotsky in 1940, he thought he'd solved everything. But you know, it's very easy to kill a human being, a man or a woman. You can anything, a bullet, a knife, a bomb. It's not difficult. But you can't kill an idea whose time has come. You cannot destroy an idea. The proof of that is the ideas of Trotsky, I would say of genuine Marxism, Leninism, Bolshevism, are today more relevant than ever, and they're getting more support than ever, you know. I know in Russia there's a huge campaign against Trotsky. We had this monstrous television series, which is a complete distortion. I mean, every minute was a lie, if not 2 or 3. It was a work of fiction, a very bad work of fiction, I might say. That also tells you something, you see. Why do they find the need to constantly attack Trotsky? It is because they fear these ideas. These ideas are dangerous to them because they really represent the resurrection of the genuine ideas of the October Revolution. And that's a serious threat to the present system and regime in Russia, of course.
I know among Russian left, so this wing, there are arguments about Trotsky or Stalin even now, but these people died many years ago. So do you think that we need to understand who was right during this period of time, or we need to move further and think about something new?
Yes, in order to move forward and to move on to something new, you first of all must settle accounts with the past. And in Russia there's a particular problem here, because one can say that there's been for the last, 60, 70 years or more, a gigantic machine of falsification of history, tremendous falsification. Not just falsification of Trotsky, falsification of Lenin also. The ideas were completely falsified. To defend the interests of a privileged bureaucracy which rose on the backs of the revolution, on the backs of the Soviet working class, if you like. And it's not a question of the difference between two men. This is wrong. It's often presented in that stupid, superficial way, as if two men would make a fundamental difference to the whole situation. That's wrong. Stalin represented the bureaucracy that rose up as a result of the backwardness of the revolution, the backwardness of Russia, the absence of culture and starvation and so on, and also the exhaustion of the Russian working class. I mean, after the World War, Revolution, Civil War, in 1 year alone, 1920, 6 million Russians starved to death because of a famine. I mean, to talk about building socialism on that basis was just absurd. The only possibility would have been, that's not Trotsky's position, by the way, it was the position of Lenin, of the Bolshevik Party, even of Stalin, before 1924. The only possibility would have been the success of the revolution internationally, in Germany, for example, which would have transformed everything. That was ABC of the Bolshevik Party until 1924. But you had the rise of the bureaucracy from these conditions, and the reason why Stalin won was not because he was cleverer than Trotsky. That's not true. But because he had the support of this layer. Trotsky tried to base himself on the working class, which is exhausted and demoralized. And by the way, Trotsky knew that he wouldn't succeed. He knew perfectly well he could not succeed under those conditions. What he was trying to do was to preserve the ideas and the program, the genuine ideas of Bolshevism, precisely for the new generation, which he succeeded in doing. You know, it's the defense of the ideas. That's what this movement is about. We are defending the original ideas of the October Revolution, of Lenin and the Bolshevik Party. That's it. And that's, in my opinion, that's the only way forward for the Russian and the world working class. So therefore, it's not a question of two individuals, it's a question of two different programs, policies, and so on. That's fundamental importance, of course.
And why do you think Stalin is so popular in Russia? Because now if we will look who supports Stalin, it is not only people who are like Marxists, but also people who just say that they're patriots. So they are quite right, in fact.
Well, I don't know that Stalin is so very popular among all Russians. I don't think that's correct. But what you say is correct. There is a certain tendency. That's not an accident, you know. It's not an accident. Vladimir Putin is a great admirer of Stalin, as a matter of fact. Of course, he would be. Because the ideas of Stalin fits in the ideas of a privileged, corrupt bureaucracy fits in very nicely with the present oligarchy that really runs Russia. And therefore, it's not an accident. Plus, of course, they deliberately foment this idea of Russian nationalism to cut across the class struggle, which is present in Russia, and it will develop in Russia. That's why they constantly advocating nationalism, to cut across the class struggle. Now, we are Marxists, we are not nationalists, we are internationalists. And we will combat nationalism because it's a very harmful thing, very dangerous thing for the working class. But of course, you have to bear in mind there's been a long period of falsification. They built up the myth of Stalin, and particularly in relation to Trotsky, a whole period of telling terrible lies. Now, of course, with the collapse of the Soviet Union and with capitalism, it's even worse. Now there's a whole industry an avalanche, a flood of books all the time, produced by university professors, showing how bad, not just Trotsky, how bad Lenin was, how bad the revolution was, how it ruined everything. Ruined everything. Ruined everything. When all of the gains of Russia is based upon the gains of the Soviet Union for 50 years. Colossal. You see, I think it's unprecedented in history, the gains of the Soviet Union, which shows the superiority of a nationalized planned economy as opposed to capitalist anarchy, you know. Well, you've got capitalism in Russia now, wonderful. I think many people in Russia, that they would not be too happy about capitalism if they were asked about it, you know. They were seriously asked about it.
Yeah, especially though life is becoming worse and worse every year.
Of course, of course. And eventually, this will express, I'm convinced, this will express itself in a revival of the real traditions of the Russian working class, which is the Bolshevik Party and its Lenin. Lenin has been terribly distorted, terribly attacked. And Trotsky, all kinds of lies, that they were mass murderers, they were butchers, you know, Palachi, all this stuff. All lies from start to finish. We have a task of recovering the genuine message of Bolshevism. That's why, if I may give some publicity to my new book, which will be out very soon, I hope to do that. It took me a long time to write that. I collected a lot of material in the Soviet Union. It is necessary to recover the genuine traditions of the Russian working class, which are the traditions of Lenin and Trotsky and Bolshevism, not Stalinism.
And not Khrushchev?
Khrushchev, now that's an interesting question. That's an interesting question. Now, I've got a small confession to make, and some of my Trotskyist friends will be very offended at this, but I've got, as we say in English, I've got a soft spot for Nikita Khrushchev. I don't think, out of all these horrible bureaucrats, he was not the worst, by the way. He wrote his memoirs, you know. I don't know if you read
Oh, I've read. It's awful. Just he wrote that he won the Second World War. So everything.
There is that. No, but it isn't that. But a lot of it is quite interesting, actually, what he writes in those memoirs, particularly about Trotskyism and so on and so forth. It's interesting. He wasn't the worst of them, Khrushchev, but he was a member of the bureaucracy, the same bureaucracy. He was defending the bureaucracy. That is perfectly true. So, better not say anything about Khrushchev.
So many people now ask questions.
Yes.
What should we do in order not to step on this bureaucracy one more time?
Well, nowadays you've got the worst of both worlds, haven't you? Because you've still got the bureaucracy is still there. The corruption is still... Well, by the way, talk about corruption in the Soviet Union. The corruption today is a million times worse, isn't it?
Yeah, but I mean, if, for example, the Marxists win, there is a revolution, and again bureaucracy, and again these mistakes.
Now that's a very good... You see, the main question we have to understand is why the bureaucracy arose. Yeah. The bureaucracy in Russia was not the product of the Bolshevik Party. It was the opposite. It was the enemy. That's why they had to exterminate the Bolshevik Party. Stalin had to exterminate the Bolsheviks to come to power. It's the product of backwardness, extreme backwardness, poverty, ignorance as well. But now, you see, Russia is not like... The Russia of today is nothing like the Russia of 1917. You have an advanced country, you've got industry, you have an educated working class, an educated population. Therefore, I would argue that once the Russian workers take power into their hands, which is the only solution possible, you will not have the same problems of the past. You don't have the same backwardness, the same ignorance, and so on. So the danger of bureaucracy is not very much. If you ask me, is there some kind of magic recipe against it? Well, there's no such thing, of course. If you want a guarantee, buy a television. They give you a very good one, you know, in England at least. There is no absolute guarantee against bureaucracy. But what I would say is this: the only real guarantee would be the application of Lenin's program, which you find in State and Revolution, and in the party program in 1919, actually, you know. Free and democratic elections with right of recall of all officials in the state. Secondly, no official must receive a higher wage than a skilled worker. Don't expect them to live in poverty, but there must be limits on that. Thirdly, no standing army or police force, but the armed people, the militia system, you know, a democratic army. And the final idea of Lenin was the most important one, that gradually, as industry would be built up and the economy would advance, all the tasks of administrating the state should be done by the workers in turn. Lenin said, when everybody is a bureaucrat in turn, nobody's a bureaucrat. And the state that way will gradually disappear. You can't abolish the state, which is the idea of the anarchists. That's an utopian idea. But gradually that should be, and with modern technology, by the way, with computers and calculating machines, it should be very easy now to have workers' control. The workers can control industry now, which they couldn't have done before. So therefore, I don't think the question of bureaucratic degeneration is posed in the same way for a country like England or America or France or Japan or Korea or Russia as it is today. It's an entirely different situation from then. And therefore, I think that the workers' democracy, which is the idea of Soviet power, is entirely viable today. Not only viable, but it's necessary if this economy is not to be strangled by the capitalists and the oligarchs.
You know, there was, they wanted to create such a program. It was called OGAS.
Sorry?
The program was called OGAS.
Yes, I
yeah, they wanted
that.
To make an automatic program which will do these things in USSR.
Yes.
Yes, but unfortunately the bureaucracy fought against it, and
well, they would.
Yeah,
they would. I didn't know about that, but they would. No, they made many attempts. Yeah. Even Khrushchev tried to avoid it, but you can't. The bureaucracy itself can't solve the problem of bureaucracy. It must come from below, you know.
Yeah. And so, do you think that there was socialism in USSR? Yeah.
No, in the USSR, what failed in the USSR was not socialism. They say, oh, socialism failed. What failed in the USSR was not socialism in any sense that would have been understood by Marx or Engels or Lenin or Trotsky. It wasn't socialism. What it was a bureaucratic and totalitarian caricature of socialism. Now, a caricature has something in common with the original. What was preserved, the progressive thing that was preserved, that wasn't destroyed. Stalin destroyed the political regime of Bolshevism completely. Workers' democracy, the Soviets, the Soviet power, workers' control, all that was eliminated. And the Bolshevik party itself was eliminated. What he maintained, what the bureaucracy did maintain, was the nationalized planned economy, which in spite of everything, in spite of the bureaucracy, achieved miracles. Now they try to deny it. Oh, it never achieved anything. That's just nonsense. I mean, history has never seen a transformation. Do you know how many workers there were in Russia in 1917? Industrial workers. Do you know?
Less than now.
Guess the number. Have a guess.
4%.
It was, I'll give you a precise figure, I don't know the percentage. Oh. It was 3.5 million industrial workers in a country of 150 million. That's less than 4%. 3.5 million. If you include transport and other sectors and mining and so all other, it wouldn't be more than 10 million. In a country of 150, that's more backward, much more backward than Pakistan today. Now, look at the progress. Within 10 or 20 years, Russia was transformed from a backward, ignorant, illiterate country, Asiatic country, into one of the most advanced industrial countries in the world. Another proof of the superiority is the Second World War. The Second World War was won by the Soviet Union, not Britain and America. They were merely onlookers till 1944. Of course, Russia suffered 27 million dead, the destruction of industry. Within 10 years, they'd rebuilt everything.
Some people will say Stalin won.
No, on the contrary, Stalin made a complete mess. That's a myth. First of all, Stalin was opposed to industrialization. Do you know that? He was opposed. Trotsky put forward the idea of industrialization. He put forward the idea of the Petersburg, you know. And Stalin replied, nah, he said, to offer the Russian people, it's like offering the Russian music a gramophone instead of a cow. Do you know that? He didn't want that. Then later he panicked in 1928 and went over to another extreme, a stupid extreme of 5-year plans in 4 years, which caused tremendous disruption and destruction. Or forced collectivization. Now, I'm in favor of collectivization. Lenin was in favor of collectivization. Trotsky was in favor of collectivization. But in a backward peasant country like Russia, you had to do that gradually and by example, on a voluntary basis. You couldn't have forced collectivization. The result was, as you know, was a complete catastrophe, which the Soviet Union never recovered from that. That's the doing of Stalin, the hooligan bureaucratic imposition of collectivism. And as for the Second World War, well, that was a catastrophe. Stalin actually, first of all, he had this Hitler-Stalin pact, which you know about. And he had the illusion that Hitler was going to respect this pact, you know. When the German army entered Paris in 1940, Stalin sent a letter of congratulation to the Germans, to the Nazis. Of course, Hitler attacked. When the Germans attacked, and Stalin had warnings from his agents in Germany and in Japan, he refused to believe it. He actually gave orders to the troops, don't move, no action must be taken, it will be a provocation. Millions of Soviet soldiers were killed, were murdered, were arrested, were slaughtered in the death camps. The Air Force was destroyed on the ground, a complete catastrophe. And Stalin was in a state of panic. That's the start, that's the reality. Now, the reason why the Soviet Union was able to resist was, first of all, the Soviet workers, in spite of everything, were loyal to the revolution. They wanted to defend the revolution. Secondly, the enormous advantage of a nationalized planned economy, which enabled them to outproduce Germany in arms and guns and so on within 18 months. So it was in spite of Stalin that the Soviet Union won the war, not because of that. That's another myth, one of the many myths that's been put forward. It's not true. The Soviet people won the war, there's no question about that. And it was a marvelous success. Military victory without parallel in military history. It was astonishing. But that was the people and the Soviet soldiers in spite of Stalin, not because of Stalin.
So today many people also argue about what shall we do now. Yeah, for example, there is a way of revolution and a way of participating in the elections, winning them, and trying to do something like reforms. But if we look, for example, to Latin America, yeah, many socialists won there, but finally everything is very sad.
What are you referring to specifically?
Yeah, what should we do, for example, the reformistic way or the revolutionary way?
Well, they're not necessarily in contradiction, you know. Not necessarily in contradiction. Revolution, I believe a revolution is necessary because what is the problem in Russia? The problem is that the Russian people, after the fall of the Soviet Union, they were robbed. It was theft on a massive scale. Like that. In all of history, I've never seen such theft. See, a gang of robbers are in control. First of all, of the industry. Some of these people, by the way, were supposed to be members of the Communist Party. Leading members. It's astonishing. That shows what sort of socialism is that? What sort of Communist Party was that? And these people, they own industry and the banks and so on. They're multimillionaires, billionaires. They got huge properties in London. You know, it's astonishing. Where I live, costing millions of pounds, all stolen from the Russian people. You're being run by thieves. That is a fact. And the state is being run by thieves. I'd better not say too much about your president because I might get into serious trouble, but all I can say is that it is a state run by thieves. I think every worker knows this, in fact. They know that corruption is terrible and so on. And ultimately, this gang of thieves must be removed. Yes, does that mean a revolution? Well, of course it will, because they'll fight for their privileges, you know. Of course they will. But they will end up the same as the Tsar. They'll end up ultimately the same as the Tsar. That I predict. Now, the other question is how to get there. Well, look at the history of the Bolshevik Party. You ask about elections. Well, insofar, there's not real democracy in Russia, but insofar as there's any democratic rights, that we should take advantage of those, of course. If there's an election, well, yes, I'm not against participating in elections. The problem is this is so restricted now, there's very little choice. Very little choice. I mean, I happen to support a party which is the Revolutionary Workers' Party, but it is a small party. Most people wouldn't know this. So when the election time comes, what is the choice? You've got the Communist Party. Now, I'll say this about the Communist Party. There's only one problem in Russia. There's only been one problem for the last 30 years or 25 years. If the Communist Party were a Communist Party, a real Communist Party, there'd be no problem. They could have taken power, and they should have taken power in 1997, when the whole thing collapsed. When many people are saying, well, capitalism has failed, and even businessmen were saying, we have failed, it's no good. They could have nationalized the basic, not everything, but they could have nationalized, taken this property which had been stolen from the people, could have been restored. You could have had a democratic socialist regime, of course. Don't want to go back to Stalinism. Did they do? They did not. Unfortunately, I'm sorry to say, they've done deals with businessmen. They've even, I think, got businessmen standing as candidates. I mean, what sort of a communist party is that, for God's sake? But nevertheless, if I had to vote in the next election, I would make my total disagreement with the policies of Zyuganov and the leaders. I'd make that very clear. But at the end of the day, I probably would vote for the Communist Party. Against Putin is the main enemy. This government is the main enemy. So, yes, we should participate. There's the question of Navalny, where we'll see how far that will go. But the question is that, yes, we'll participate in elections or anything else, and we'll utilize any other democratic possibility that's open to us. But ultimately, yes, there will be a serious clash, I think, between the working class and the oligarchs. That's the problem. These crooks. It's shameful. It makes me, I'll tell you something, Maria. I love Russia, you know. I've always been a Russophile ever since I was a child. Yeah, seriously. I love the Russian people. It makes my heart bleed when I see this Russia today. It makes my heart bleed. The Russian people deserve better than this, Maria. After all they sacrificed, all that they did, it makes me weep. And they're led by a gang of corrupt crooks that have stolen everything. It is criminal. It is criminal. It makes my heart bleed. And it cannot continue like this. And I'm sure that the Russian people who I admire, and the Russian working class, who I greatly admire, will not stand for this eventually. They will not stand for it. We'll reach the same point as we did in January the 9th, 1905, you know. And it can happen suddenly like that. It will surprise, the Russian workers are going to surprise everybody, you know. Maybe not immediately. And until that occurs, of course, we will participate in any form of struggle that is open to us. I think that's correct. But ultimately, yes, it will come down to a struggle between this gang of usurpers and thieves and the Russian people led by the working class, of course.
And many people compare now the situation to the 1905. Yes, but unfortunately, many people think that in Russia we don't have a party. For example, the Bolsheviki had such a party in Russia till this moment.
You think so?
So I need your opinion.
Well, you read my book, you find out. No, it's not as simple as that, you know. Not as simple as that. If you look, the fact of the matter is, in January 1905, they were split anyway, the Bolsheviks and they just split, and a split always causes problems. They were reduced to a tiny handful, really, a few hundred at the most in St. Petersburg. Most of the workers were not with the Social Democrats, as they were called then. They were with Father Gapon and the Union of the Russian Workers, I think he called it. This was a police union. It was set up by the police. You know this?
Yeah, by Zubatov and others.
Zubatov, precisely. Zubatov, that's right. But what's interesting is this. Very often people say to me, they complain, you know, these lefts, they've got a bad habit, they complain too much. They say, oh no, the Russian workers are useless. I heard the same story in England and other countries. No, the workers are useless. They don't understand. They've got a very low level of consciousness. Oh yes, all right. What was the average level of consciousness of the Russian workers in St. Petersburg in 1905, in January, you know? The average worker would have been recently from the land. He'd have been a peasant, ex-peasant. He'd have brought all his prejudices with him. He would have been profoundly religious. He would have drank a lot of vodka, you know. He would have beat his wife. And he believed in the Tsar, the Batyushka, you know. Okay, that was the average. I'll tell you something. When the Bolsheviks and the Mensheviks went to the workers with leaflets calling for a republic, down with the Tsar. The workers in the Potila factory tore up the leaflets and very often they beat them. Do you know that? And when they came offering money for the strike funds, they accepted reluctantly. They didn't even. And when this demonstration occurred, by the way, that's an interesting thought. The Russian workers appear first of all on the stage of history, the 9th of January, 1905, not with red flags, but with icons, pictures of the Verda, the Bogorodica, led by a priest, singing religious hymns, okay? Peaceful demonstration with a petition to present to the Batyushka, to the Tsar, please help us because we are poor and so on. That was the level of consciousness. And when the Social Democrats, when the Bolsheviks and others asked to participate in the demonstration, they were told, okay, you can participate, no banners, no flags, no slogans, go to the back. That saved their lives, actually. They were at the back and therefore they were not killed. But the point I'm making is this. The same night, the 9th of January, the same workers who had torn up the leaflets went to the Bolsheviks with one demand: give us arms. Give us guns. There is no Tsar. Finish. Now, why am I saying? They knew who the Bolsheviks were, of course. They went straight to them. Same people that they'd beaten. They went to them. What does this show? It shows how consciousness develops. It doesn't develop in a gradual, slow way. No. It can proceed from a very low level. Then all of us, but there's a slow accumulation of discontent. Dialectically, quantity becomes quality. It reaches a critical point, and you get an explosion. That will happen again. And there was no party before, but the Bolshevik Party and the Mensheviks, they fused actually. And the Social Democratic Party, within a few months, became a party of 100,000 or so. So that is the view. That's how things will go. And it can happen suddenly like that, when nobody expects it. That's for sure.
Now in Russia there are many little parties.
Yes.
Yeah. Do you know some of them?
Over the years, I've met quite a few of them.
So which are the most progressive, in your opinion?
Well, I have to say the party which I support is the Revolutionary Workers' Party, which has grown quite well recently. That is the Russian section of the IMT. So, and as for the others, well, I'm very sorry to say this, but I don't think they've got any future at all. But that's just my opinion. You are free to disagree. But I think that certainly Trotskyism's got a big future in Russia. It also depends on events, which we can't. We don't create the revolutionary events. But there will be revolutionary events which we can benefit, we can build upon that if the communists work correctly and they don't make too many mistakes anyway.
When I was in London, I met people from the Communist Party of London, and they told me that they think that the revolution will start in Russia, and then the Britain will also participate in it.
Well, it shows they don't know anything about Russia, and they know even less about Britain. By the way, the Communist Party doesn't exist in England. Do you know that? It doesn't exist. It was dissolved about 30 years ago, 40 years ago. No, 30 years ago. They dissolved it.
The name is the same.
What is the point of a name? How many members do they have?
Just about 100 in London.
Even that is doubtful. That's very doubtful. No, it doesn't exist really. You're talking about the remnant, the tiny remnants of what's left over from the breakup of Stalinism. It's finished, actually. Absolutely finished. So.
But what do you think about their words? That everything will start in Russia?
That's not impossible. I don't think it's the most likely variant. I think there are other countries that probably got more immediate even it might start first in the United States. This is a surprise. Might start first in America. Mm-hmm. That's a surprise, you know. They recently did an opinion poll in America, which showed that 67% of young people below 25 years of age would vote for a socialist president. And that 30% of people above 65 would vote for a socialist president. This is astonishing. If you think of all the anti-socialist propaganda for the last half a century or more. So there's a ferment also in the United States. There's a big ferment. And the ideas of socialism are developing. You know, Trump a few months ago, the White House published a document against socialism, against Marxism. You know that? Did you not see that? No. Yes. Why should they do this? Mm-hmm. I answered it. Why should they do it? Last year it was. This time last year. Why should they do this? They say in the document, the ideas of socialism are spreading in an alarming way in the States. They say this. And this is why socialism is bad, and this, that, and the other. Well, that shows something, you know. It's a general phenomenon. Things are moving quite quickly. Yes, Russia might surprise us, might be in China. Look at Hong Kong now. Who expected that?
Do you think there is socialism in China?
Certainly not. It's capitalism. Same as Russia. Oh, they say it's socialism with Chinese characteristics, yes. If you can believe that, you can believe anything. It's capitalism, of course. But in China, they got the worst of all worlds because they got capitalism and they've got the same totalitarian Stalinist state. So that can't last. I'll tell you, China will explode. There's a huge working class in China now because of the development of industry. Hong Kong is a warning. It's a warning. That will. I think they will be defeated now. They're going to crush them. It's clear. But that will come up again in every city of China. And I'll tell you something. That will happen when people least expect it. When nobody expects it, it will go up. Because it's like a totalitarian state. It's like a pressure cooker with the safety valve removed, you know, clamped down. Pressure's building up all the time. Do you know China spends more now on internal security than on defense? Do you know that? Mm-hmm. That tells you what you need to know. They know what's occurring. So recently they arrested a lot of students who were studying Marx in China. You saw that. And Hong Kong, that's a real indication of how things, once it starts, look out. So, yes, I am very optimistic. Russia, it's possible, but I don't think so. I don't think it will start in Russia necessarily. Who knows? It might.
And what about Cuba?
Cuba, well, I've had some dealings with Cuba. You know, I've been to Cuba quite a few times. You see, the problem is this. Of course, we defend the Cuban Revolution. Of course, we defend the gains of the Cuban Revolution. But look, if it's a Stalinist regime, really, but it's a weak Stalinist regime in Cuba. They've given certain openings, certain democrats, like in Perestroika in some respects. But if that system could not survive in Russia, which is a huge country with big resources, or in China, which is a huge country with big resources, how can it survive in a little island in the Caribbean, which is next door to the most powerful capitalist state in the world? The only reason why capitalism has not been restored in Cuba up till now is because of the stupidity of the American imperialists. They really are fools, you know. They're complete idiots. The blockade of Cuba is what helped to preserve the regime. If they wanted to overthrow Cuba, they should precisely trade with it and put investments. Then it wouldn't last very long. Tourism and so it wouldn't last very long. But with their policy, they've pushed them. Now, I know, I've been to Cuba many times, and I've been in contact with people there who are not Trotskyists, old revolutionaries and so on, that believe in the revolution, but they're against capitalism. And we offer them our hand. We'll have a united front because we're against the establishment of capitalism in Cuba, of course. Now, unfortunately, see, this is linked with Venezuela. The only solution I've stated this when I went to Cuba. I spoke at a meeting of the Communist Party. By the way, in the meeting where I spoke, there were members of the Central Committee to discuss the reform. One of those who spoke from the platform was quoting from Trotsky's book, The Revolution Betrayed. And the members of the Central Committee didn't say anything. I spoke and I said, look, the only solution for Cuba is, clearly the present situation can't continue. There is a crisis, that's clear. But the solution is not privatization on the market. That would be a disaster for the Cuban people. The solution would be workers' control, you know, to democratize the revolution, against bureaucracy, eliminate the bureaucracy, and above all, the extension of the revolution to South America, starting with Venezuela, which was possible. You know that I was quite friendly with Hugo Chavez. It was possible. It's not possible now. I think that's ended up very badly. But that will have a negative effect on Cuba, you see, once Venezuela goes. And about Venezuela, I'm not particularly optimistic now. So,
why it happened so there?
In Venezuela?
Yeah.
Well, that doesn't surprise me, you see. I predicted that. Look, the Venezuelan revolution was a genuine revolution. It was a tremendous revolution, which we supported. I think we were the only ones in the world that supported it from the beginnings. I launched the campaign Hands Off Venezuela, which is very successful. I had good relations with President Chavez, and he was very interested in our ideas. He was interested in the IMT. He read my books. He praised them in public. And he told me to my face that when he was speaking about world revolution and so on, and he used to quote not just Lenin, but Trozky and Rosa Luxemburg and so on in his speeches. Who's ever done that? He said, no, it's only some ideas which I've learned from you. He told me that to my face. So I think Hugo Chavez, he was a remarkable man. He was he's been slandered and attacked and so on in a horrible way. He was a very honest man, very sincere man, a very brave man that stood up to the oligarchs and to imperialism, stood up to them very bravely. And he sincerely wanted socialism, the socialist revolution, but he didn't know how to do this. And he considered himself a Marxist, but I think his knowledge of Marxism was not perfect anyway. And he was under pressure from the bureaucracy, also from the Cuban bureaucracy. They didn't want socialism in Venezuela. He did many good things. They did nationalize sections of the industry, but they didn't nationalize everything. They didn't go the whole way, you see. Now, I told him many times, and I've said this in Venezuela on television, to mass meetings, in the press, the newspapers, you cannot make half a revolution. What you've done is very good, but it's only half a revolution. If you try to you try to combine socialism and capitalism, you try to combine a nationalized economy and the market, you'll end up with chaos. It will end up in a crash, and that will lead to the growth of the counter-revolution. It's precisely what's happened. What I was afraid of. I've warned them time and time again. But that again, Chavez didn't have a real party. He held himself at the top. And now you see the consequences. And I'm frankly pessimistic now about the result there. Although, to be honest with you, the remarkable thing is it's lasted for so long. I thought the counter-revolution would have succeeded long ago. But the masses are very loyal to the revolution, you see. They remain loyal to the revolution, but everything has its limits. And they've gone beyond those limits now, I think.
Thank you for an interesting discussion, because we can discuss it for years. Yeah. Yeah. So it was Station Marx sign, and don't forget to put likes. Maybe you want to say something to our viewers.
Yes, well, I think first of all that your program, your series is an excellent idea, and I'm very pleased to have the privilege and the pleasure of participating in it. I wish you every success. The last word that I've got will be the victory of socialism is inevitable, and that all people in Russia that want to fight for democracy and civilization and human rights and a better future should take the trouble to study the genuine ideas of Lenin, of Trotsky and the Bolshevik Party, and unite around the only forces that can lead the way forward. I will praise particularly the Revolutionary Workers' Party, but above all, you must read and study for yourselves and make up your own minds, and you will see that the only ideas that represent the future are the ideas of Lenin, of Trotsky, of the Bolshevik Party, and of course, of the greatest event in human history, which was the October Revolution.